G'day, welcome to another episode of the Pier Review. This time we'll be reviewing a concept and practice known as the science of learning. Now, I've got a bit of a background in education, but no real qualification beyond my Bachelor of Arts and Diploma of Education, and the Certificate 4 in Training and Assessment, and that Certificate 3 in Agriculture. But I undertook that BA and Dip Ed many years ago. So I don't profess to being an expert on this subject, but remember, this is the Pier Review, where any mug standing on a pier can review anything he likes. Because in this world of post-truth, every mug's opinion has the weight of a peer review. P-E-E-R. In human evolution, and in every human's individual journey, the concept of learning came before the concept of science. Science is a refinement of learning, a particular process of acquiring knowledge. So what therefore is the science of learning? Well, we'll look at that in a minute or two. But first, as we're examining a science, let's start with a hypothesis. So, what is my hypothesis? Well, I hypothesise that the science of learning is a crock of shit, because learning is not a science, and the science of learning is not learning, by which we mean understanding, but merely indoctrination, and nor is it science. This is because, from the perspective of both the learner and the teacher, the science of learning rests on the premise that you cannot question it, which itself is the antithesis of science. Okay, so let's start with some definitions. Firstly, the definition of science. Science is the systematic study of the structure and behaviour of the physical and natural world through observation, experimentation, and the testing of theories against the evidence obtained. Okay, so next, the definition of learning. Well, learning is the acquisition of knowledge or skills through study, experience, or being taught. So, according to those definitions, the science of learning, therefore, should be the systematic study through observation, experimentation, and the testing of theories about how human beings acquire knowledge or skills through study, experience, or being taught. But is it? So, in a few minutes, we'll look at how the proponents of the science of learning frame their study. But first, let's look at the science of learning in practice. This is Pritesh Raichura, an English teacher, a science teacher from England, who's a well-known proponent of the science of learning.
Okay, pause there. I say you say covalent.
Covalent.
Try again.
Covalent.
Good.
N-A-C-O.
Beautiful reading, merit for you, and also merit for Hamza and Lena earlier for their reading as well. So, whenever you have a metal bonding with a non-metal, what kind of bonding do you get between them? Loud and proud. Please. Really good. We call it a strong ionic bond. I say, you say, strong ionic bond.
Strong ionic bond!
Okay, how do I know sodium chloride has got ionic bonding in it? Ooh, tell your partners, go.
Sodium is a metal and chlorine is a non-metal. So when you do a
3, 2,
reaction,
1,
you get
hands
sodium
up.
chloride.
Good, merit for you, Mia. Which bit is the metal in sodium chloride? On 3, 1, 2, 3.
Sodium.
And chlorine is the 1, 2, 3.
Non-metal.
Good. So therefore, the type of bonding is 3 words. Strong something bonding. Let's say all 3 words together on 3. 1, 2, 3.
Strong ionic bonding.
Smashed it.
And this is another example of Pritesh in action.
The number of coils is the heads down. Open for not sure, sir. Open for control variable. Close dependent variable. Close independent variable. Close. Heads up. It is the independent variable. Remind your partners what that is and why it's the number of coils. Go. Good. 3, 2, 1. Hands up. Every hand should be up nice and straight. Straighten up that arm. Lovely stuff. Let's hear from loud and proud. Good. Perfect answer.
Now, what does that remind you of?
You're all individuals!
Or maybe it reminded you of this.
The boys of the fatherland become state servants. On the word, splash.
Surely not. But before we dive deeper into the theory of the science of learning, let's go back to the beginning we all had and look at the first things that we all learnt and how we learned them. What were those things? Walking and talking. So let's walk the walk and talk the talk. And do we learn to talk or walk in a structured way directed by an educator? No. It's a process of trial and error, mainly self-driven. First we crawled, then we had a go at hauling ourselves up on 2 legs, then we took a couple of steps, fell over and tried again until we could do it. We might have had a bit of help from Mum to hold us up. Now, the science of learning grew out of the science of reading, which said that students must master the phonetic sounds before they can be allowed to form and read words. But we didn't do that when we learnt the sounds in the first place. We learned the words, but mispronounced the sounds. Like, I can't find my towel, when she means, I can't find my cow. She knows the words, but hasn't yet mastered the sounds, but eventually does. So that around the age of 4, we are able to understand everything the child says. In learning to speak, mispronunciation is allowed and encouraged, not criticised, constantly corrected or sanctioned. Now, when a child learns to speak, parents and others around them certainly tend to have more of an input than when a child learns to walk, but certainly not as much input or intervention as when they are taught to read. Now, I could go off on a big tangent about the so-called reading wars, but at the coalface of education, there never were any reading wars. The only people who were, and still are, talking about the reading wars are the science of reading and phonics ideologues who say that you must have a strictly phonics approach and not a whole language approach. But the truth is, there never was an exclusively whole language approach. That is, an approach where students actually had to work out the sounds by themselves from remembering the words. So before we get to the nuts and bolts, or dogma, of the science of learning, how does it address the issue of early learning, such as walking and talking? Well, it dismisses them as biological primary learning, things that come naturally to us via evolution. So the science of learning essentially ignores this first learning when we learnt to learn. That's a bit of an easy out, if you ask me. The previous slide came from a paper released by the Centre for Independent Studies, entitled "What is the Science of Learning?" Now, the CIS is an Australian think tank which is aligned with the Liberal Party of Australia. And for those non-Australian viewers, the Liberal Party is our version of the Conservative Party. It's on the right wing of politics. Not far right, but getting further right. So what does the CIS paper say about education generally and the science of learning in particular? They define the science of learning as being based on explicit instruction, which is the careful ordering of content, explanation in small steps, and student practice after each step, as demonstrated by Pritesh Raichura earlier in the video. But why the need for this? Well, according to the Centre for Independent Studies, learning in school, since the 18th century no less, has been following progressive educational beliefs where students learn best when they guide their own learning, when it's based on projects and rote learning is harmful. Now, first up, I would question the historiography of that claim that progressive education has existed from the 18th century. Now, some early schooling, and this was way before universal education, might have operated like that, but traditional schooling in the 19th and most of the 20th century did not operate like that. Rather, it was the industrial model of assembly line education. My own school experience in the 1970s was like that. And as to the learning all being guided by students allegation, that was certainly not my experience in my 30 plus years of working in the school sector. And yet only a bit later in the paper, the CIS author acknowledges that traditional education was the factory model, while still claiming that throughout the 20th century it became progressive and student directed. Note the spelling error that I have corrected. Bit of a slip up there for someone focused on the science of learning. So, while I would dispute that education has been dominated by a student-directed approach which works against learning and needed to be replaced by the explicit instruction model, or according to the science of learning, there are some holes in the CIS paper, just like there's some holes in this Pier. The CIS claims that rather than representing a return to traditional education that de-individualises teachers and students, the science of learning emphasises contemporary scientific knowledge as the basis for the student learning. But the practice of the science of learning emphasises that every teacher should teach in exactly the same way, and the practice demonstrated by Pritesh Raichura, at least, pretty much shows the students in a "yes, we are all individuals" setting. And then the CIS paper criticises the Australian curriculum for emphasising inquiry, critical thinking and ethical understanding.
Yes, we are all different. I'm not.
And strangely, in its attempt to differentiate how we learn to speak pretty much by ourselves, by dismissing it as biological primary knowledge, and it says that only a science of learning approach can be used to teach us to read, because reading requires the ability to decode written symbols with sounds, as though speaking didn't require us to decode concepts, i.e. words, and associate them with another type of code, i.e. sounds, to make those words. So, who wrote this paper for the Centre for Independent Studies? Who is this flawed educational expert? Well, the paper was written by Tricia Jarr, who, while she now has a Masters of Teaching, was once a secondary teacher under the Teach for Australia program, which took people who hadn't been taught to teach and made them teachers. Yeah, right, she learnt by doing. Now, some Teach for Australia educators were good, some were bad. But to be fair, one of the best educators I've ever had the privilege of working with and leading, Roy Lurs, was also not a trained teacher. But let's look a little further at Tricia Jarr's qualifications. What exactly is a Masters of Teaching? Well, it's an initial teacher education qualification, a course that you do after an initial degree if you want to become a secondary teacher. It has essentially replaced the Diploma of Education, although it's now 2 years duration rather than 1 year's duration. So Tricia's first degree is, like mine, a Bachelor of Arts. So this expert, writing on the science of learning, is no more of an expert than this mug standing on a pier. But let's look further. Tricia states that she has a Masters of Teaching with a specialisation in research. But let's cut to the course structure. And we'll find that every student doing a Masters of Teaching at Deakin does those 4 research units because they're core units. Tricia has not specialised in research. She's not specialised in anything. And if we look at her profile on ResearchGate, we'll find that she doesn't have any published research. So Tricia Jarr is just another mug with an opinion who should be standing on a pier. So what example does Tricia use to illustrate the science of learning? Covalent and ionic bonding like Pritesh Raitura demonstrated? Well, no.
The science of learning brings together different fields, including cognitive science and educational psychology, and uses that to inform teaching practice. Let's talk about some key elements of the science of learning in a familiar example. Think about when you learned to drive. What if we didn't build up skills systematically? Imagine putting a learner driver straight into busy traffic, cranking up the volume and yapping in their ear, all while they're trying to figure out how to operate a car. They'd be overwhelmed and pose a danger to themselves and others.
Really? She says that we need to use the science of learning, explicit bit-by-bit instruction, because learning otherwise could be as dangerous as letting a kid drive unaccompanied in the city. And of course, no Aussie kid ever learnt to drive in a paddock, did they?
I'm driving the car.
So once again, this video has gone on a little bit longer than I expected. So I think we'll end part 1 here, as we've found out that Tricia Jarr should be standing on a pier with me here. And stay tuned for part 2, where we'll examine some actual people with expertise and their views upon the science of learning, before we come to our final conclusion and see whether my hypothesis is correct. So if you've liked this one, please click like, please subscribe. If you're an educator, feel free to make comments in the comments below, and stay tuned for the next episode, of the peer review of the Science of Learning Part 2. Thanks for watching.